March 30th, 1853. A biting wind sweeps across the flat, desolate heaths of North Brabant, a forgotten corner of the Netherlands. In the small town of Groot-Zundert, inside a modest brick parsonage, a boy is born. His parents, Theodorus van Gogh, a stern Protestant pastor, and Anna Cornelia, a woman of quiet sorrows, name him Vincent Willem. But this was not the first time that name had been used. Exactly 1 year to the day before his birth, another Vincent Willem had been born in this same house. He had been stillborn. Every Sunday, as young Vincent walked to church, he had to pass a small grave in the parish cemetery. There, carved in cold stone, he saw his own name, his own birthday, and the date of death, March 30th, 1852. For a sensitive child, this was not just a headstone, it was a mirror. He grew up feeling like a substitute, a living phantom, meant to fill the void left by a ghost. This was the first mark, the seal of the outcast. He was the child who lived in the shadow of a dead namesake. The atmosphere of the parsonage was one of rigid piety, dark wooden panels, the heavy scent of wax from church candles, and the rhythmic, hollow ticking of old clocks. His father, Theodorus, was a man of unshakable faith and uncompromising rules. To him, the word of God was a shield against the joys of the world. His mother, Anna, tried to soften this coldness with her love for nature and sketching, but even her tenderness could not dispel the gloom that draped the Van Gogh household like a shroud. Vincent grew into an awkward, silent child. He was a shock of fiery red hair and piercing blue eyes that seemed to burn with an inner, restless tension. While other children played in the village square, Vincent preferred long, solitary walks through the gorse-covered moors. He was a collector of the world. He didn't just look at birds, he memorized the architecture of their nests. He didn't just see the clouds moving over the Brabant plains. He studied the tragedy in their gray, heavy forms. Already there was a desperate need in him to see what remained hidden to others. The dignity in a blade of withered grass, the secret life of insects, the profound sorrow of a silent landscape. In the hierarchy of the parsonage, Vincent was the anomaly. His father loved his children with a distant, demanding love that required obedience and conformity. But Vincent was too passionate, too unpredictable. His sudden outbursts of temper, followed by long periods of melancholy, frightened his parents. Pastor Theodorus saw in his eldest son not a successor to the family tradition of service, but a source of constant anxiety. A chasm of misunderstanding opened between them, one that would only widen as the years passed. There was only one soul who truly understood the fire burning inside him, his younger brother, Theo. Born in May 1857, Theo was the polar opposite, calm, balanced, and possessing a natural grace that Vincent lacked. Yet between these two, a bond was forged that transcended brotherhood. It was a covenant of souls. Their correspondence, begun in their youth, would become one of the most profound documents of human devotion in history. In 1869, at the age of 16, Vincent's fate was decided by the family. His school years had been mediocre. He was bright but stubborn, refusing to follow rules and clashing with teachers. Through family connections, he was secured a position at the Hague branch of Goupil & Ca, a prestigious international art dealership managed by his uncle Vincent. For a provincial youth, this was a gateway to a magnificent world. Vincent was a diligent employee. He studied the catalogs with the same fervor he would later apply to the Bible. He learned the nuances of engravings, the brushwork of the old masters, and the business of beauty. For a few years, it seemed he might find a place in respectable society. But the darkness returned when he was transferred to the London branch in 1873. It was here, in the sprawling, foggy metropolis, that Vincent experienced his first true emotional collapse. He fell in love with his landlady's daughter, Eugénie Loyer. Vincent did not love like other men. He loved with a pathological intensity that knew no boundaries. For months he hovered in silent adoration, his passion growing into an obsession. When he finally mustered the courage to propose, Eugénie rejected him coldly. She was already secretly engaged to another. The rejection was more than a heartbreak. It was an execution. Vincent withdrew into himself. He stopped caring for his appearance, began to neglect his duties at the gallery, and spent his nights wandering the poorest quarters of London. He saw the prostitutes, the starving laborers, the hollow-eyed children of the Industrial Revolution. Something snapped. The latent religiosity of his upbringing erupted with a desperate, frantic power. He began to read the Bible for hours, seeking a God who could speak to the broken. By 1876, Vincent was dismissed from Goupil in CA. He was unbearable, his religious fervor making him aggressive and unfit for the commercial world. He tried teaching in England. He tried working as a bookseller in Dordrecht. Every attempt ended in failure. At 24, Vincent van Gogh was a man without a future, a disappointment to his father, and a burden to his family. Then he made a choice that convinced everyone he had finally lost his mind. He decided to become a missionary. He wanted to take the word of God to the darkest, most forgotten corners of Europe. In December 1878, he arrived in the Borinage, a coal mining district in Belgium. It was a place where the sun rarely penetrated the thick veil of coal dust. The village of Wasmes was a vision of purgatory. The houses were blackened by soot. The wind carried the stench of poverty and sickness. Men, women, and children descended into the bowels of the earth for 14 hours a day, working in narrow, airless galleries where the threat of explosion or collapse was a constant companion. The official church sent preachers to maintain order and teach humility, but Vincent did not come to teach. He came to suffer. He moved into a tiny, freezing room, but soon gave his bed to a sick woman and began sleeping on the floor on a heap of straw. He gave away his warm clothes to miners whose lungs were failing. He stopped washing, his skin becoming gray with the same coal dust that covered his flock. He ate nothing but scraps of bread and cold potatoes. When a mine explosion killed dozens of workers, Vincent was there, deep in the shafts, dragging out the wounded, his hands raw and bloodied. He turned his room into a makeshift hospital, nursing the burned and the broken with a tenderness that bordered on the divine. The miners looked at this strange, red-haired man with a mixture of awe and fear. They saw that his faith was real. It was a fire that was consuming him. He didn't preach from a pulpit. He spoke to them in the mud. He spoke of a Christ who was as poor and as broken as they were. In July 1879, an inspector from the Evangelical Committee arrived to evaluate Vincent's work. He was horrified. Instead of a dignified representative of the church, he found a man who looked like a beggar. Vincent was filthy, emaciated, and surrounded by coal dust sketches of the miners. The inspector spoke of decorum and the dignity of the ministry. Vincent responded with a fierce, terrifying honesty. He told the inspector that Christ lived among the outcasts, not in the plush chairs of the committee. He accused the church of being blind to the agony of the people. The result was inevitable. Vincent was dismissed for undermining the dignity of the priesthood. This was the ultimate blow. Vincent had given God everything, his health, his youth, his sanity. And the church had spat him out because he was too Christian for them. He remained in the Borinage for months, wandering the slag heaps like a ghost. He was a man who had lost his God, his family, and his purpose. But in this total darkness, a new light began to flicker. During his time with the miners, he had begun to draw, not to make art, but to document the truth. He drew the old miner with hands gnarled like tree roots. He drew the women carrying heavy sacks of coal, their backs bent under the weight of an unfair world. He realized that words had failed him, but the line in the charcoal could speak the truth of human suffering. In August 1880, he wrote to Theo. It was a letter of surrender and rebirth. I am a man of passions, capable of doing more or less foolish things, but I feel that I have a purpose. He decided at the age of 27 to become a painter. He left the Borinage on foot, walking away from the black pits of the earth towards a future he could not yet see. Behind him lay the ashes of a preacher, ahead lay the path of the artist who would eventually set the world on fire. After the spiritual collapse in the Borinage, Vincent returned to his parents' home in Eton in 1881. He was 28 years old, a man who had failed at everything, commerce, teaching, and the ministry. He brought with him nothing but a few charcoal sketches and a desperate, fanatical resolve to master the craft of drawing. In the eyes of his father, Pastor Theodorus, Vincent was a living disgrace. He was a son who refused to work, who spent his days wandering the fields with a sketchbook, looking unkempt and smelling of turpentine. But Vincent was indifferent to their judgment. He had found a new gospel. He spent 12 hours a day drawing the peasants in the fields, the weavers at their looms, and the sewers under the vast Brabant sky. He studied anatomy from books until his eyes burned. He wasn't looking for beauty, he was looking for the truth of the earth. It was during this summer in Eton that Vincent's heart was set ablaze once more. His cousin, Kivos Stricker, a recently widowed mother, came to visit. She was a woman who knew sorrow, and in her grief, Vincent saw a reflection of his own soul. He fell in love with a frantic, suffocating passion. He pursued her with letters and declarations, ignoring the social taboos of the time. When she finally answered with a firm, "No, never, never," Vincent refused to accept it. He followed her to Amsterdam, confronting her parents. In a moment of terrifying desperation, he held his hand over the flame of a lamp and cried out, "Let me see her for as long as I can keep my hand in this flame." The horrified family blew out the lamp and showed him the door. This second great rejection shattered his relationship with his family. On Christmas Day, 1881, after a violent argument with his father over his refusal to attend church, Vincent was cast out. He left for The Hague, severed from his past, carrying only his easel and his resentment. In the cold, gray streets of The Hague, Vincent found a different kind of companionship. He met Clasina Maria Hornick, known as Cien, a pregnant prostitute, an alcoholic, and a mother to a young daughter. To the world, she was the lowest of the low. To Vincent, she was a sister in suffering. He took her into his modest studio, providing her with food and a home. For the first time, Vincent tried to play the role of a husband and a father. He drew her incessantly. His famous drawing Sorrow depicts Cien, naked, withered, her head buried in her arms. It is a portrait of human exhaustion. He wanted to save her, to redeem her through his love. But Cien was bound to the streets. She could not understand his obsession with art, and he could not provide the life she wanted. Under pressure from his family and his teacher, Anton Mauve, who eventually abandoned him because of the scandal, Vincent realized the relationship was doomed. In 1883, he left her. It was his final attempt at a conventional family life. From that moment on, women would be ghosts in his life, replaced by the vivid, demanding colors of his canvas. By 1885, Vincent was living in Wenen, where his father had taken a new parish. Here, he produced his first masterpiece, The Potato Eaters. He wanted to paint the peasants as they really were, with skin the color of a dusty potato, with gnarled hands that had tilled the very soil they were eating from. He painted in dark, earthy tones, wanting the viewer to smell the steam of the meal and the smoke of the lamp. When his father died suddenly of a stroke that same year, Vincent felt a heavy, unspoken guilt. He had brought nothing but turmoil to the old man's life. Shortly after, he left the Netherlands forever. He spent a brief, starving time in Antwerp, discovering the works of Rubens and Japanese prints. But his body was failing, his teeth were rotting, his stomach was ruined by coffee and tobacco. He needed a revolution. In February 1886, Vincent arrived in Paris unannounced. He climbed the hill of Montmartre and moved into Theo's small apartment on Rue Lepic. Paris was a revelation. Through Theo, he was thrust into the heart of the Impressionist movement. He met Pissarro, Gauguin, Seurat, and Toulouse-Lautrec. The dark, muddy palette of his Dutch years evaporated. Under the influence of the Parisian light, Vincent began to experiment with pure color. He discovered the laws of contrast, how a stroke of blue makes orange scream, how red and green vibrate against each other. He painted the windmills of Montmartre, the cafes, and the faces of the avant-garde. But the city was a double-edged sword. Vincent began to drink absinthe, the green fairy that sharpened his senses but frayed his nerves. He became a fixture in the cafes of Clichy, arguing until dawn about the future of art. He was aggressive, fanatical, and often drunk. Even Theo, the most patient of souls, found it nearly impossible to live with him. "There are two people in him," Theo wrote to their sister. "One is marvelously gifted and tender, and the other is an egoist with a heart of stone." By early 1888, the noise and the gray winter of Paris had pushed Vincent to the brink of a nervous breakdown. He was coughing, drinking too much, and his mind was a whirlpool of unresolved theories. He longed for a blue lookout, a place where the sun was so bright it would wash away the filth of the city. He decided to go to Arles in Provence. He dreamed of establishing the Studio of the South, a commune where artists could live and work in harmony, free from the greed of art dealers. When he stepped off the train in Arles on February 20th, 1888, the town was covered in an unexpected blanket of snow. But Vincent didn't care. He could feel the sun waiting behind the clouds. He moved into a hotel and began to wait for the spring. He had no way of knowing that he was entering the most productive, most brilliant, and most tragic chapter of his life. He was a man possessed, ready to trade his sanity for the light of the sun. Spring in Arles, 1888, was a revelation. As the snow melted, the landscape exploded into a riot of pink peach blossoms and white plum petals. Vincent was out in the fields at dawn, his easel anchored against the fierce mistral wind. He worked with a speed that frightened the locals. He wasn't just painting nature. He was attacking the canvas, laying on the paint so thick it looked like molten lava. In May, he found his sanctuary, the Yellow House on Place Lamartine. He rented 4 rooms, painting the exterior a bright, defiant yellow. This was to be his monastery of art. He spent every cent Theo sent on furniture and paints, often living on nothing but bread and coffee for days. He was preparing for the arrival of Paul Gauguin, the man he believed would be the dean of his new academy. During these months of waiting, Vincent produced his most iconic works. He painted the sunflowers, not as mere flowers, but as glowing icons of the sun itself. He painted the night cafe with its blood-red walls and clashing greens, wanting to express the terrible human passions of a place where one could ruin oneself. He painted his own bedroom, a room of supposed peace that vibrated with an unsettling, electric energy. He was a man living on the edge of a golden ecstasy, fueled by tobacco, absinthe, and the relentless Provençal sun. Paul Gauguin finally arrived in October 1888. At first, it was a dream come true. They painted together in the Elyscom, discussed art in the evenings, and shared meals. But the honeymoon was short-lived. Gauguin was arrogant, orderly, and cynical. Vincent was chaotic, emotional, and desperate for affection. Gauguin looked at Vincent's thick impasto with disdain, calling it messy. He urged Vincent to paint from memory, while Vincent insisted on the sacred presence of the model. They drank heavily. The air in the Yellow House became thick with unspoken resentment and loud, alcohol-fueled arguments. Gauguin grew weary of Vincent's mood swings and his suffocating presence. By December, the tension reached a breaking point. Gauguin announced he was leaving for Paris. On the evening of December 23rd, 1888, something in Vincent's mind snapped. The fear of being abandoned once again by his brother in art, by his only friend, was more than he could bear. After a final violent confrontation, Gauguin fled the house. Alone in the Yellow House, surrounded by his canvases, Vincent took a straight razor. In a fit of hallucinatory despair, he cut off the lower part of his left ear. He wrapped the bloody trophy in newspaper and walked to a local brothel. He asked for a woman named Rachel and handed her the package. "Keep this carefully," he said, before stumbling back home to bleed out in his bed. The next morning, the police found him unconscious. Gauguin fled Arles without ever seeing Vincent again. The studio of the South was dead, drowned in blood and madness. The townspeople of Arles were terrified of the red-headed madman. A petition was signed to have him locked away. Recognizing his own fragility, Vincent voluntarily entered the asylum of St. Paul de Mausolée in Saint-Rémy in May 1889. His life was reduced to a small cell with a barred window. But even in a madhouse, he could not stop. He turned his second cell into a studio. Looking through the bars at night, he saw the cosmos in motion. He painted the Starry Night, where the sky is no longer a static canopy, but a swirling, pulsating ocean of energy. The stars are like explosions. The cypress tree rises like a black flame toward the moon. He suffered from terrifying attacks where he would scream for hours or try to swallow his own poisonous paints. Yet, in his lucid moments, his art reached a level of serene, crystalline beauty. He painted the olive groves, the irises in the garden, and the mountains. He was searching for a rhythm in nature that could stabilize the chaos of his mind. In May 1890, feeling he could no longer stay in the asylum, Vincent moved north to Auvers-sur-Oise, near Paris. He was placed under the care of Dr. Paul Gachet, a specialist in melancholy who was also a friend to the Impressionists. Vincent's productivity in Auvers was supernatural. He painted one canvas every single day. He painted the village church, the thatched cottages, and the portrait of Dr. Gachet, whom he described as sick and as sad as himself. But the shadow was closing in. He visited Theo in Paris and found his brother exhausted, struggling with a new baby, a demanding job, and failing health. Vincent felt like a parasite, a permanent burden on the one person he loved. He returned to Over and painted Wheatfield with crows. The gold of the wheat is threatened by a dark, turbulent sky. Three paths lead nowhere, and blackbirds rise like omens of death. On July 27, 1890, Vincent walked into the golden wheat fields he had painted so many times. He carried a small 7mm revolver. He pulled the trigger, aiming for his heart, but the bullet missed, lodging deep in his chest. He didn't die. Bleeding and in agony, he stumbled back to the Ravu Inn and climbed to his tiny attic room. When Dr. Gachet and Theo arrived, they found him calmly smoking his pipe. "I missed," he whispered to Theo. "I wanted to kill myself, but I missed." For 2 days, the brothers sat together. Theo held Vincent's hand as he had done when they were children. There were no grand speeches, only the quiet ticking of the clock. On July 29th at 1:30 in the morning, Vincent turned to his brother and uttered his final words. "The sadness will last forever." He was 37 years old. Vincent was buried in the cemetery of Auvers, surrounded by the wheat. Theo, broken by the loss, followed him to the grave just 6 months later. At the time of his death, Vincent van Gogh was considered a failure. He had sold only one painting in his entire life for a few hundred francs. But his sister-in-law, Jo van Gogh Bonger, refused to let his fire go out. She published his letters and organized exhibitions, showing the world that these weren't the scrawls of a madman, but the visions of a prophet. Today, Vincent's paintings are the most recognizable and expensive in the world. But he never knew the fame. He never knew the millions. He only knew the struggle to capture the sun before the darkness took him. The sadness may last forever, but so does the light he left behind. Vincent gave his life to show us the world as he saw it, vibrant, emotional, and full of light. If this story touched your heart, please help us keep the memory of great creators alive. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Which of Van Gogh's paintings is your favorite? Your support helps us create more content like this. Thank you for watching.